In this episode of Wisdom on Fire, we'll extinguish the toxic pollution of gossip with compassionate coaching and the 1-3-1 problem management framework. Compassionate coaching lovingly facilitates the owner of the problem to own the problem. And the 1-3-1 framework, which we'll go in detail here, brings actionable clarity to the nature of the problem and primes the conversation for the unity of community and not the division of gossip. Hi, I'm Dr. Jay Hawthorne, and I help Christian leaders overcome the darkness of meaningless work with the flame of Christian wisdom. 2 quick comments on my focus on Christian leaders in response to a viewer question. First, Wisdom on Fire is trying to help Christian leaders, but in truth, these tips will help anyone because the truth is true, whatever you think about Jesus. Secondly, after speaking to hundreds of Christian leaders, I have found they've had the same struggles that I've had in many ways, where they're trying to figure out, what does it mean to lead like Jesus? And I just want to say there are profoundly powerful resources available, and I do my best to share those here. But for anyone who invites Jesus into their life and work, I think it's a huge boost. So with that, let's get into it. We're going to clarify the problem, then we're going to double down on this double strength solution of compassionate coaching combined with the 1-3-1 framework. And then we're going to have a few questions at the end to ask ourselves for application. Part 1, let's jump into the problem. So here's the situation, because I think one of the most meaningful things in human life is the relationships that we have with one another. It's not required that anyone become best friends where they work, but the joy of work comes a little easier when people get along okay. And gossip is truly a joy killer. It doesn't create safety on the team. In fact, it's toxic to teams. And it's not easy to keep the weeds of gossip out of the garden of our work community. So let's get ourselves in the right frame of mind. Imagine someone, say Gary Gossip, approaches you and he has distress on his face. He obviously wants to talk. You're a team member at the company. Maybe you're being treated as a leader because Gary trusts you. At the very least, Gary starts unloading about another team member. Let's call him Albert. Now, how should you, as a Christian leader, respond with wisdom? I think it's hard because on one hand, say you immediately shut Gary down. It might seem harsh. It might seem unloving, but you just say, this isn't right. But it also doesn't feel right to just shut Gary down when he's so obviously upset. On the other hand, simply listening to Gary rant may send a message that gossip or maybe this kind of toxic negativity is okay. Passivity allows Gary's gossip to create toxic energy in your culture, and affirming Gary's rant will multiply that toxicity for your team, adding negative energy to Gary's energy. Now, as an aside, I get it. Sometimes work is tough and we all have off days. And so what I'm not saying is that there's no need ever to just address problems and that you can't just have a bad day and be grumpy. But this is not the same as gossip. So let's get more clear on how gossip hurts team dynamics. Maybe you want to call it your culture. And let's talk about some defining features of gossip itself so we can distinguish gossip from simply trying to figure out stuff that's broken and needs fixing. Most people know gossip is wrong, at least when someone is gossiping about them. But why is gossip bad? Now, Christian ethics identifies gossip as bad by nature. In its essence, there's something wrong here because gossip is a sin. It hurts people by dividing them instead of loving them and connecting them with one another. The word sin here means that there's a separating power at work where something is out of place. It's removed from its intended place. Sin separates or removes us from God and from others. Jesus is serious about canceling the power of sin, including gossip. More, Jesus is bringing people together and helping mature them become who they are created to be. Following Jesus, Christian leaders should be equipped to multiply and facilitate community, encourage people, and cast aside things like divisive gossip. A good general rule for Christian ethical conduct is that an action is ethical if it is the sort of action that Jesus would take. For example, if something is undoing the effects of sin. That here's something that sin has affected and we're going to reverse that. It's likely the right thing to do. So let's look a little bit more at the distinctive features of gossip. How could we undo those? According to author Matt Mitchell, he described 3 B's as part of what makes gossip gossip: bad news, behind one's back, and a bad heart. So let's consider this first B in more detail, because managers who allow or energize bad news, this bad news talk against other individuals or the organization, contribute to the toxicity of the team, because those leaders are the main gatekeepers of culture. Gallup's research has found that, quote, managers, more than any other factor, influence team engagement and performance. 70% of the variance in team engagement is determined solely by the manager. So if you're the leader of a small team, you're the one who's in charge of the culture. The second B behind one's back. And it describes how gossiping doesn't seek to solve a situation directly with the individual. In fact, it avoids communicating with the parties involved, and it creates division as a result. The third B is this bad heart, which describes the motive. And not only do we not know motives, but perhaps even that person is unconscious to the motive that they want to hurt another person, or the manager or the company or whoever they have their beef with. Because maybe if they're honest with themselves, they want to make themselves look good or knowledgeable or gain power, some benefit. And although the distinctions of these 3 B's make identifying gossip simple, it's not easy to have these conversations. If you can relate to the difficulty of dealing with situations like this, hit like for me. Let me know that you go, this is hard for me too. So what might a Christian do to respond in love and wisdom to a situation like this? Well, my approach has 2 parts: compassionate coaching and equipping the person with the problem framework. And since the framework is something that you generally use, they're not going to feel targeted like, oh, you're thinking I'm a gossip. So in part 1, let's get into this compassionate coaching. In the flow of life, when someone approaches you to communicate, we begin listening intently and we allow a person to speak. And compassionate coaching, in some ways, is not my default because so much of my personal love bank is low. And it's low on funds that I don't have. So for me to do this well, I often need to shoot up a quick prayer and say, hey, Jesus, I need a deposit. You've got love I don't have. Would you give me some of your love so I can listen well? And when I'm confidently anchored in my relationship with God, I can more actively aid in another's emotional processing, because that way I can become safe and open to them. Research and common experience know that people who don't feel heard, they don't perceive the listener as open in a conversation. So in this first part of the second part, begin by openly assuming a positive motive. Affirm in your mind that this person is sharing and caring about company culture. Maybe even say that out loud, that, hey, I can see that you care, that this is an important issue that we got to address. The second part is to resist this temptation to take on that problem. We don't want to disempower and weaken the coworker as if they can't handle something. We want to treat them like an adult. Third is we want to move to coaching to reinforce a healthy culture by challenging them to choose an action for how they wish to address this issue to whatever the relevant parties are. So the interaction might sound something like this. Thank you, Gary, for caring enough about the company and our culture to bring up this issue. This really needs to be addressed. And now that you've processed this issue with me, are you clear enough on what the problem is to properly work things out with Albert? Say that Albert's the name of the offender in question. Or do you need me to join you as a third party? And I'll say, it's sad to me that most people are not used to this kind of calm acceptance accompanied by a challenge to confront the problem. And I'll say most people aren't practicing listening that way. I know it's a discipline for me. I'm working on this myself. So here is where offering a tool to help guide this person in a conversation can feel like a lifeline for them. Because although there's probably a lot of other tools in there, this 131 framework is very useful and it's simple for addressing problems. And one of the central assumptions, beginning with compassionate coaching, is that you care enough about the people that you work with, including Gary, to support them and help him mature. And so we work with competent, intelligent people. So we want to assume that if they come to us with a problem, that it's not loving to treat them as incompetent, nor is it loving to this person in our community that they belong to leave divisive issues unaddressed. That's going to go badly. Love, especially compassionate love, wills another's good. So in the third part of our video here, what we're trying to do is to equip people with this 1-3-1 framework. So what does that mean? Maybe you start this conversation with Gary and you say, hey, do you know the 1-3-1 framework? Do you see how to approach Albert? Then include the offer to teach them the 1-3-1 framework. Say, hey, would you like a framework that I think would be helpful? And this is where when somebody wants to hand you their problem, 1-3-1, you can help them, one, get clarity about what's going on. You want to share 3 possible solutions and you want to offer 1 recommendation. And working through this framework in other contexts solves issues just doing that. And at least for me, it's easy for me to open up my mouth and complain before I've thought about a problem or potential solutions. So if I go through the process and I put together something in this 1-3-1 framework, it helps me get a new perspective. And sometimes the energy that I felt that was negative goes away. And that can be true even for gossip. So the second B is eliminated just having the conversation with Albert. By directing Gary to Albert, that B of gossip is gone because it's not spreading behind his back. So again, let me go over the framework in a little bit more detail because you want to share that problem. Clarity is the key here. If you want to deal with problems that are difficult and say we want someone to take action, we need to be really clear about what we expect them to do. What is the problem that we are trying to solve? Consider this problem. How do you make a turtle fast? Will you take away his food? Now, without clarity for the problem, the solution may not meet your expectation. We need to treat the problems, not the people. So we shouldn't address Albert as if Albert's the problem, but we need to address Albert's behavior. So getting clear and helping Gary get clear about the problem sorts out the politicking and the potential isolating of this personality conflict that may be there. And sometimes just this step dissolves the complaint or maybe even converts the complaint into a real opportunity for connection. And of course, if we stay focused on the issue, it can be solved. Clarity may even evaporate the badness news of gossip by leaving an issue in a way that it can be solved. Now, with the 3 solutions, identifying 3 solutions will also help Gary gossip too. If he considers all the angles to a problem in order to come up with his 3 solutions, Gary might even see his own contribution to the situation with Albert. When this happens, the problem is not just Albert's bad news, but Gary's too. That's what happens when Gary sees himself in that situation. So then when Gary offers 1 suggested or endorsed solution, this assumes that when people see a problem and they are the person who's probably got the most vision into what the solution might be. So their recommendation really helps. And in terms of gossip, it might help change this bad heart idea into something where they're contributing by offering a solution. It positions both Gary and Albert as stakeholders in the community. And we tend to care about the things that we consider our own. So as we say to Gary to offer a solution, then he feels like he's contributed to that exact problem. Additionally, the 1-3-1 framework is a great tool just for a starting point to solving any problem when someone wants to bring a problem for you. It helps the whole team in many ways. And in this case, it can lower the risk that gossip can pose. Lastly, let's think about some questions. If you're a Christian leader, or you identify as a servant leader, whether you have the title or not, do you see why God is concerned about sinful effects of gossip? How are you stewarding the culture of community or possibly the group that you're leading? Which way are you more inclined to receive Gary gossip? Right? What's your position towards receiving him? Do you lean towards silencing or ignoring him? Or maybe energizing the bad news? What's kind of your default posture? How do you see problems and process problems with others? Are you a dump and run? Do you maybe adopt people's problems? Are you a put on your cape and help them out? What are the ways that you are tempted towards? And how might you see using the 131 framework? Now, if you got any value from this, subscribe and get notified of the next episode. Let's fan the flame of Christian wisdom. Until next time.